Hi everyone, it's Jane, and today I'm going to talk about a very important current issue, and that is sports betting. Now, why am I talking about sports betting of all things? Well, I think it's very important because, I was reading through a lot of things, and I really realized that, sports betting is a very important, issue in today's world, especially after the 2018 Supreme Court decision on it, and after some thought, I realized, hey, look, right? Remember the Jaden's Chit Chat videos from before when I was talking about current events? Well, I want to go back to that. And I think that one reason I want to do that is because, again, reading is important because of the fact that you want to also use it to analyze current events. And this is a very current and important event. So let's get into it because this is an incredibly interesting topic. I don't think a lot of people thought, oh, it's a very interesting topic, right? It's just sports betting, but it actually turns out it's a very interesting story, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So, why sports betting all of a sudden? Well, I guess it's a pretty old topic. The story starts in 2018, so pretty old. But what happens is that in 2018, the NCAA, I've kind of forgotten what that means, but I'm pretty sure it's the association, NCAA versus Murphy. I'm not exactly sure, but basically, big Supreme Court case, the Supreme Court ruled that states have the right to legalize sports betting. Now, up until then, sports betting was totally illegal. Now, according to some articles that I read, because obviously, this was a topic that I had to learn about a lot, but because of other things, but along the way I really got interested in the topic as well because it's a very fascinating story about legality and politics and even taxes, and so I really got interested along the way. But basically what happens is that before that, lots of people, they were already gambling on offshore sites, and it was very bad. But then the decision was hey, you know what, let's let states legalize stuff, right? And so what happened was that actually happened, and lots of states right now have legalized sports betting. I think around 30 something states have legalized it. Now, some states have still said, no, we're not legalizing it. Some states include California, I think Utah, there were several other states, I think a list of a bit more than 10 states. I think Arkansas maybe, but I'm not exactly sure. There's a bunch of other states. I think I remember California the best because California is oh yes, and Texas. California and Texas, those are the two things that I remembered the best because really big states, right? But anyway, these states, other than these states, 38 states or something have said, sports betting, come on in. Now, you might wonder why, right? Because according to lots of articles I read, sports betting is very, very, very bad. That's for a lot of reasons. First, it really is addictive because a lot of these apps and platforms are made to be addictive. They give you notifications and they give you stuff like advertisements. And according to one article that I read, the advertisement industry, via radio, social media, TV, all of those things, was so prolific that anybody over the age of 12 knew how to set up a bet and bet. Now, I don't know how to set up a bet, so I don't think that's a completely true article, and I don't think that a lot of people I know how to set up a bet, so I don't know about that, but what I can say is that the point is, betting advertisements and all that really gotten out of hand, right? Because of that, I think it's pretty clear that, it's a big problem, right? Advertisements obviously are, wreaking havoc across, the nation because advertisements have a lot of different harms. For example, they can increase the rates of child abuse and violence among, families, and also, not only so, but it can actually cause, even more problems. For example, loss of debt. The average gambler had $55,000 of debt. A lot of people went bankrupt. I think around 14% don't have emergency savings. And betting is also so addictive. Lots of people have gambling disorders where they cannot stop gambling. Now, again, I'm not like a registered like professional on this. I'm not a professor. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people in the world that know so much more about this than me. About the gambling disorder definition, I think that's the right definition. There is a disorder related to gambling that has that name. I'm not exactly sure if that's the right name. But basically, the point is that there's a lot of lots of problems related to gambling. Also, gambling sites are notoriously known for having really bad data policies, and I mean really bad. For example, lots of like sportsbook platforms now, they call it sports books because I don't know, because like you like write the bets down on a book, or I don't know, like I think it's like from like older terms when people didn't have computers and you know everybody was writing their bets down on books or something. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know the history of betting or anything like that. But what I do know is that these sites are really bad at cybersecurity, and I mean very bad. For example, hackers, 1.5 billion BetMGM accounts breached in I think like 2022 or 2023. Now, you might not know what BetMGM is, but it's one of the largest, it's a big player in the sportsbook industry. And while we're talking about big players, let's name a few. FanDuel and DraftKings, largest betting sites ever. Now, these sites are also not awesome. Okay, they're promoting gambling. I wouldn't say that they're great, but they also have been known to target users. They have a grand monopoly, and in fact, their merger was stopped by I think the Federal Trade Commission because that would mean that they could create a monopoly. Now, I don't want to like take any sides here, obviously, but I will say that gambling is a highly addictive activity, and these companies are literally just promoting it. So, you know, not great, obviously, pretty bad, but only so there's several other big players out there. I'm not going to name all of them, but basically there's been lots of hacks, lots of breaches, millions of accounts breached. I'm pretty sure like passwords, or not passwords exactly, but like email addresses, home addresses, stuff like that, all leaked. And that's a big problem. It hasn't helped that lots of advertisements contain celebrities to like attract younger viewers, even though the advertisement rules are basically saying, look, you cannot target young children. You cannot target people who are obviously at risk. And by at risk, I mean these companies literally track people's behavior so they know if this person is like prone to betting. And then if that person tries to quit betting, they send a million notifications and emails saying, you know, big opportunity. You could win $1 billion or like, you know, a lot of money, right? Or you could say, bet $100, you get back your money if it doesn't work out, or something like that, right? Risk-free bets. Lots of advertisements with risk-free bets, right? Free money, $20 starts, stuff like that. It's very bad because most of the time these advertisements are not actually accurate. Yeah, you get your money back in credits that you have to spend on only gambling. Obviously, gambling itself is not risk-free. That's like what's the definition of gambling? I don't think it's very risk-free. There's lots of things like that, right? And also like in general, like lots of the things just don't work out. These advertisements are obviously trying to hype up gambling. And you know what? Even I saw gambling ads, and how I saw it was I was at a restaurant and I was eating, and on the TV like right over there was like a big ad for like Sportsbook or FanDuels or whatever, right? And so I wasn't really paying that much attention, but I was like, wow, there's so many ads, because right after that one there was another one. And so basically my point is that this has become an enormous problem, and now celebrities are endorsing it, right? Big names like Hollywood stars, stuff like that. Those people are now endorsing it. They're going on the commercials, and they're like holding up the app, and they're like, buy this, get like $1 billion, right? And that's attracting lots of younger people as well. And newer studies from I think the University of Bristol have found that, actually it's not the University of Bristol, my bad. It was another university, I forgot the name. But basically, they have found that organic advertisements, and I think what organic advertisements are that they basically like attract the current fan base. I think that's what organic advertisements like definition is. But basically, a large percentage of them did not actually like follow any regulations, which obviously really stinks. And gambling has been growing. It's skyrocketed. And while numbers have gone down a bit, like I think around 19.2 million people are gambling and millions are addicted. It's become an enormous problem that needs a solution. And so, one idea that people have pitched is for the Federal Trade Commission to step. Now, why is the Federal Trade Commission at all relevant? It's relevant because the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, is very like a big player in regulating companies. It's most well known for breaking up monopolies / antitrust. Now, what antitrust is that they basically break up these monopolies, and how they break up these monopolies is like two big companies like Alaskan Airlines and Hawaiian Airlines, right? This happened before. They try to merge. The FTC is like, no. If you do this, you're gonna make a monopoly. Now, why are monopolies bad? Monopolies are bad because imagine this. Say company A owns 50% of the market. Say that company B owns 40% of the market. Let's say that the market is selling hot dogs. So company A sells 50% of the hot dogs in the United States. Company B sells like 40% of the hot dogs in the United States. And some small companies make up the next 10%. Now, what happens if company A and company B say, let's team up and let's make a grand mega corporation? Company A plus B, 90% of the market. What happens is that now they control 90% of the entire market. So they sell 90% of the sausages or the hot dogs, right? Hot dogs. Now the bad thing about this is that means they can just set the price. They can bully around the remaining 10%, and they have so much money because they have 90% of the market. They can just outcompete the rest. And that's bad because that means they effectively have control over the prices of the hot dogs. They have control over what happens to the consumers. Because when you have so much control of the market, you can say, let's raise the price of hot dogs by $100 and let's make like this like 6-pack hot dog thing, let's make it worth $200. And the consumer can't do anything about it because because company A plus B is the only company out there that's selling hot dogs. I mean, there's the remaining 10%, sure, but they're not a big part of the market. You know, some supermarkets, they're not going to be selling company C or like the rest of the 10%. And like A plus B are like the majority, right? That's the one that everybody's going to be hearing about. So the consumer is going to be forced to spend more money, and that's bad. Anyway, that was off on a tangent, but basically that's why the FTC has said, look, you can't do that anymore. So A and B, you guys are going to have to remain competitors so that you guys make sure that the price is down. Now that's the FTC. Now that's the main product or like the main goal of the FTC, and you might say, why is this in any way related to what we're talking about? But article like Section 5 of the FTC Act. The FTC Act, you can think of it as like the constitution of the FTC. It's like the founding like document that really grants the FTC power in certain things. What it says is that the FTC can also stop companies when it's doing bad things, just unfair practices. And this is true. Though antitrust is its main focus, it can also focus on like unfair things. For example, the FTC has like stopped like, for example, you know, cigarette advertising. Cigarette advertising in the 1970s was a big thing. I think like some guy named like Joe the Camel. I think he was like a cartoon. It might not be Joe the Camel. It was a camel, but I don't know if his name was Joe. But anyway, cartoon character wanted to lure in the kids because the big cigarette companies were like, you know what? Let's spread let's spread like smoking to everybody. Obviously, not a great thing. So the FTC stepped in. They said, no, you cannot do that. Bam. Now, I don't think you see Joe the Camel around. Mostly, there's no like enormous cigarette advertising. Back then, you have to understand that cigarettes were a big thing. Doctors were saying that cigarettes were good for you. Cigarettes, everybody smokes. Like if you look in the old movies, everybody has like a cigar or a pipe or something. These days, not so much. Like, I mean, sure, cigars are still like a big thing, but back in the olden days, lots of smoking. And the reason was that there was an enormous advertising storm, but that was all stopped by the FTC. So, Can the FTC do the same thing for sports betting? And FTC has done a lot of other things as well. They just protect like people against like unfair stuff. Like for example, if there's a scam or a fraud, the FTC is the guy that like really, or the guy or the gal that really like prevents all of the bad things from happening. It's the agency that really makes sure that like the consumers are protected, right? It's the Federal Trade Commission, and as regulating trade, it like regulates all of those things, right? So can the FTC do this? Again, it probably can or it can't. A few reasons for this. First, the FTC is known for like having a very small budget. It has a very small budget. It's already very, very overstretched. And that has led the FTC director to announce that they're gonna have to cut back on operations. In fact, I think as like 1 month ago, the FTC was shut down. I'm pretty sure it's still shut down, but I'm not exactly sure on that. But basically, the point is that like, the FTC doesn't have a lot of money. So if we're gonna put this into sports gambling, that means that the FTC won't have a lot of money to do other things. For example, regulate healthcare and big technology companies, which it has been doing for the past like for a long time, right? And this is a big problem because the FTC is pretty good at what it does: healthcare and technology. It has prevented lots of mergers. Like just like a few weeks ago, what they did was that they actually stopped the like 2 months ago at this point. They actually prevented the merger of, they prevented the monopoly of insulin companies, insulin drug companies. Now you might think, why are we caring about insulin drugs? The thing is, insulin drugs, they're not bad drugs, they're good drugs. They're good medications. Now insulin is important because lots of people rely on it. Lots of people need insulin drugs to survive. Now, 3 companies, they are making the insulin drug prices go up. So, the FTC made this go down. And they've actually begun to solve it, right? They've made deals, they say that they have lowered the price of drugs by I think like $7 billion for consumers in the next 10 years. So basically, consumers will save $7 billion in the next 10 years because of this deal. So imagine if it goes to sports betting. What happens? The FTC will be able to do other things less effectively. It'll also maybe not even have the jurisdiction, right? Because it doesn't really have the might of the FBI. It doesn't have the enforcement power, right? It can say, we now have this regulation that makes companies do that. But companies can adapt. Companies can just ignore the rules. They can just say, we agree, and then you know, like those terms and conditions that are like 1 billion pages long. Like if you like download an app, there's like terms and conditions and really long, really small print. You scroll and scroll, but like it keeps on going, right? And like it's like and then to continue, it says check that you have read and understood everything, right? And it's so many words. Imagine if a company just like put in a little paragraph saying that anything that a little paragraph that basically denies it liability. Imagine if a company says, you know what? Yes, we can use bad advertising practices, but you have read and understood the conditions and you've conceded to them or like assented to them, so it's okay. If they put that in there, imagine that like somebody is like just looking at it and be like, okay, yeah. They might not catch it. Or even if they do catch it, they might not understand the gravity of what it's saying, right? And that's just really bad. And so is it even effective, right? The FBI can just be like, you know what? Y'all go to jail for like 5 years, like 10 years. The FTC can't do that. I mean, it has been effective in the past, so that is something. But who knows, right? That's one question. But there have been successful policies in the past. Spain, right? It decided to limit down on advertising. What happened? Millions of euros less spent on gambling and gambling advertising. So some success stories out there. Now the reason I'm just talking about this is because it's obviously a very, very interesting subject. It goes into a lot of different things. And one thing that's really cool about this is that it can even have repercussions that make the gambling industry worse. When the FTC steps in, what could happen is that companies do agree, that they do concede. But because of this, they have to charge the consumer more. Because imagine what happens when companies are like, oh my gosh, I have to follow all of these new regulations that the FTC has imposed on me. I have to spend so much more money. Well, how are they going to make that up that profit again? They're gonna say, hey consumers, give me more money, give me like more fees, like I'm gonna charge more fees on you so you can give me more money, right? And because of that, consumers have to pay more. Now, there are a lot of illegal sites out there, and in fact, before the 2008 Supreme Court decision, what happened was that there were like primarily these legal sites out there, these illegal sites, offshore illegal sites out there that facilitated gambling. And so these people, lots of people argue, are just going to be pushed back into these illegal sites. Pushed back, and what's going to happen is that it's going to be even worse. Because these illegal gambling sites, like, we can say lots of bad stuff about legal gambling sites. Obviously, their mission and their like contributions to the world are obviously not amazing. They're pretty bad. But illegal gambling sites are much worse because they have none of the consumer protections that legal gambling sites have. You might ask, what, like, I don't think that legal gambling sites offer a lot of consumer protections. Well, they do, but they still cause loss of addiction. At the end of the day, I don't think they're that effective. But without them, the situation becomes much worse. And lots of these illegal gambling sites, there's frauds, there's scams. People lose so much money out of them. And they're even more addictive, and they're just so much bad, so much worse, that what happens is that people lose even more money. They have to like resort to crime and violence to get the money that they want. They could even go into like money laundering so that they can get the money that they want. And that's even worse. So, I have a question for you. What would you do? If you had to say, should the FTC solve this problem, what would you say? Would you say it should because it has worked in the past and this is a bad problem that has to be solved? Or are you gonna say no because of things like offshoring? And you know, there's arguments against offshoring, right? At the end of the day, historically, the FTC's power has worked, right? Like in Spain, for example. And some people do say, at the end of the day, gambling is a large problem. Let's do whatever we can to solve it. And at the end of the day, also, like, lots of people say, look, it doesn't matter whether or not, like, this generation of gamblers goes to offshore companies, right? Like, obviously, it's a big problem, and it's very, very sad. But the FTC prevents advertisements from going to the next generation because FTC really protects children from gambling advertisements. And that's good because, like, okay, this generation of gamblers, they might have to gamble no matter what, right? Because these people are already addicted. Now, I don't think that's true. I think there's plenty of ways that we can solve this problem, and there are ways of solving this problem. But, like, in this mindset, what we're saying is we can at least protect the kids so that, because right now, like, gambling companies, they're kind of targeting kids as well. So the FTC is going to at least prevent that. So they're going to prevent the spread of gambling to the next generation. So the gambling is all going to stop at this generation. The next generation, no gambling. That's going to be like, and you know how many generations are going to be in the future, right? Infinite generations. So that's maybe an even larger impact. But obviously, this is up to you. You can decide, but hopefully this was very interesting. I'm just really passionate about this topic because I kind of stumbled into this while I was reading some articles and, you know, I had to do some stuff. And then I realized this is an amazing subject area with so many things. I haven't even gone into some of the things. For example, lots of people say that states are doing a good job of regulating, and others say, look, gambling companies are right now sending out lobbyists to the state governments to make them do stuff, and states don't even have the resources or the will to do to solve gambling, especially because they get so much taxes from gambling, stuff like that. There's so many like tensions and politics, or I guess not politics especially, but like I guess this is a pretty politics free subject, but more like tensions and like money and like lots of, and greed, and lots of other things that really make you think, wow, even in this like one thing, there are so many amazing things that you can learn. So I think that this was like a very interesting thing for me. I think that like lots of people just hear gambling and they're like, no, let's not talk about gambling. But I think it's very important that we understand gambling because it's an issue that is right now taking over the United States. And once we understand the harms of it, we can better prevent it, we can better treat it, and we can make sure that the people around us and ourselves don't get sunk into this, right? Because I think after this, like, some people might say, oh my gosh, you learned more about gambling. Now you are more prone to gamble. Well, after hearing this, I think I've gotten just more terrified of gambling, especially because the average gambler has $55,000 in debt, and gambling companies have their apps designed so that you lose money. That's how they make money, right? It's like made on purpose so that you psychologically want to like spend more money even though you're losing so much money. They're literally, you can think of them almost as rigged platforms. Even though they're not technically rigged, they almost are. And I think it's just very important to know about a lot of this. I hope that you enjoyed this Jaden's Chit Chat video. It's been a long time since I've done one of these, but I hope that you enjoy. Keep reading, and I'll see you next time. Bye!